close your mic so that we don't have the crosstalk distortions. Uh, I have also started the recording of the session so that we can have, I can upload this later on. If you remember, we last time discussed that how the risks are identified, and Mubashir, can you close the camera? Because please, this is the class discipline that nobody has to put on the camera and mic. Otherwise, we will expel him from the session. Because this creates a distortion for the speaker. Okay, I can do that. Okay, so we discuss a case study in the software industry, that how the various panels were formed, and based on the panel discussion across the different countries and continents, the top 10 very serious problems were identified across the world. So this is normally that we try to see that what can be the expected risk we can undertake during the project. So we discussed this, and I think you can see, Imran, you can see the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the data collection method, we discussed that mainly they use the brainstorming process, in which they normally, the Delphi brainstorming process, in which the difference between the brainstorming and the Delphi brainstorming is that in brainstorming, we normally know the respondents. For example, if 10 people are discussing the issues which are faced by a project, all the people, panelists, are then known to the speakers, and they can have discussion together to resolve the top 10 or 50 risks. But many times we see that the people avoid to have direct conversation. They would not like to have their identity, and in that case, they may prefer to have anonymous kind of brainstorming, and this is called Delphi technique. In the Delphi technique, we try to develop a consensus amongst the panelists, but while not identifying their names. And this is normally an iteration process which continues for 3 or 4 cycles. And by the end of the day, we then rank the top 10 or 5, whatever we need, as the risk categories. So this is normally done for all kind of qualitative analysis, in which we have a number of factors in our mind, and based on the panelists and expertise, we try to see that one can be the top 10 or top 20 risk we can identify. And this is an iterative collective wisdom process, brainstorming and Delphi brainstorming. We'll discuss about that. So we last time discussed, I'm not going to this, that how the countries like Hong Kong, the panelists from Hong Kong, United States, and Finland try to identify the top risk factors in their relative countries, which are there in the software development industry. And this we can do also in our case. For example, if we are doing some construction projects, we can collect the experts from the construction industry, and then we can sit with them. But certainly these problems would vary from place to place and country to country. So it's not always necessary that the top 10 we identify in Pakistan may also be the problem in the construction industry or in the software development industry, same in the Hong Kong or UK. So that's why there might be some difference in opinion. There may be a difference in ranking of the top 10 factors. So we discussed also the risk identification process, that the process in which we are trying to identify the important risks which we need to tackle during the currency of project. So we try to first of all identify that what can be the purpose of the risk identification, that what kind of risk can happen during the currency of project, and what will be the rationale for the identification of risk. Now, this is really very important because maybe a risk which is very high to me based on my perception may not be that high to you. So we would like to see that there must be a common rationale or understanding based on which we can reach at a consensus. Then we try to give the inputs to the team. For example, they may include the historical data of the, for example, the social sector projects in the Gilgit-Baltistan for the last 10 years, for the last 20 years, and the kind of risk we would have faced there. So the historical data, then some theoretical models may be there to help us. And there may be some empirical data which is published based on some field visit experimental data, which is published and available in the secondary data. And even the primary data can be useful during the project to tell us that what can be the probable factors and risks during the project. Then people with informed opinion, the stakeholders from society, the employers, and many other people who are there in the projects can also help us to identify the various risk factors. And then the stakeholder in general, which may be the people from media, the people from the government departments, from the planning department, can help us to make it sure that how can we then help the हाँ जी ठीक है जी इमरान साहब आवाज ठीक आ रही है अनम्यूट करें हाँ जी इमरान और anybody who can just tell me whether the voice is correct clear
जी सर ठीक है सर आपकी ऑडियो
चलिए good so we go to the next is that the method we discussed that the most commonly used method is checklist that normally the corporates and the organizations have developed their checklist and based on that checklist they would tell you to please visit and see that what kind of risk you can have and that is the most easiest way but the problem with the checklist is that many risks may not be identified through the checklist system and that is where the problem is. Sometimes we have within the checklist we have different kind of checklists. For example, we have explanatory checklist in which not only we check the relevant risk, but at the same time we give the explanatory notes also. The brainstorming we discussed, the most commonly used is to bring the panel of experts and place the problem before them or project before them. And then we try to see the discussion. And finally, we try to resolve that what can be the 10 or 5 major problems or risk in the project. But as I already discussed that there can be some personal bias also. And the people may not be willing to express their concerns or risk understanding of the risk based on their personal understanding in front of other people. So we then try to make it through Delphi Technique, which is a brainstorming process, but the name of the person who is giving the feedback is not known to the forum or panel, and we don't announce their name, and unanimously we try to create a consensus on the top 10 or 5 or whatever we consider is more important for us. Then we have the questionnaire kind of, which is normally in the primary data collection that we are doing this in a number of projects currently with the GLAF2 in the vulnerability assessment survey. And sometime I'll share with you that what are the attributes of these assessment, and we are trying to identify the factors, the risk factors which are there to the people, the demographic distribution, the livelihood, the disaster related issues and so on. So based on that, we can go for the primary data collection. We last time went to the Shimshal before Eid, and certainly we went to Gilmeth. A lot of primary data about the risk assessment due to GLAF2 we collected, and we are trying now to publish that, and we are trying to submit that to the Planning and Development Department and the GLAF2 and UNDP project. Similarly, based on the template of previous projects, we have already done. There is always a lesson learned part in the project's completion reports, And within the lesson learned, we normally try to document the risk which we could experience in the project. That is really very important, but unfortunately, when we are submitting the PC4 or the completion reports of the project, it is very rarely done by the project managers. I think this is really very important in the future, for the future direction of the project, that if you really want to be very careful next time, then you should share your lessons learned, the problems you faced, the delays and things like that, which can help you to document the lesson learned for the coming project managers. And then there are some special techniques to the computer simulations. We will discuss about all these. And once we are going through these processes, we may use a single process, or we may use the combination of processes. For example, in this GLOF2 project, we are using not only the questionnaire survey, but at the same time, we are using checklist methods, and we are also using the focal group discussion. So it's a combination of three kinds of tools we are using in the qualitative research. As a matter of fact, we are trying to see that how can we get a very empirical data, a very evidence-based data about the risk assessment of the GLOF2 projects. And then once it is done, and this process is completed, then we develop two important things. One is the risk register, which is the most important document in which we write down all the risks we have identified, maybe 100, maybe 50, and against each risk, we then also describe the nature of that risk. For example, based on my experience in the projects for the last 25, 30 years, I understand that the biggest risk we have in the projects is the cost escalation or cost increase. And then that is followed by the scope changes, that is followed by the time extension, and maybe the quality or the technical performance issues. So based on that, we develop the risk register, and for each risk factor, we are trying to see that there are one or two sentences to explain that what is the nature of this risk and how can we mitigate it. So risk identification, the process of understanding what potential events might hurt or enhance a project. I discussed this last time that every risk may not be negative. There are always some positive risks, and I discussed last time that how the pandemic was used to improve our online education, and today you can see that we are doing a lot of good things online. How can we review the blended learning system? So there are always a positive risks also, which we call opportunities. So you try to enhance these positive risk or opportunities, and you try to mitigate the negative risk which are there in the projects. This is an iterative process. There is no formula. There is no any kind of equation through which you can just say that we will have these 10 or 20 kinds of projects. So this is an iterative process which will continue for some time to have the panel discussions, the group discussions, the questionnaire survey, and maybe the published data you have already there in the department, or historical data. So this iterative process then will lead to more wisdom, and a collective wisdom will create more good knowledge. Then the participation in the risk identification activities includes the project managers, the project team members, customers, subject matter experts from outside and project team, and users, other project managers, stakeholders, and risk management experts. So normally, this brainstorming is done by a very highly qualified panel of experts having a diverse representation from different areas who have already done this kind of project. अच्छा जनाब कोई क्लास में आई डोंट नो आरिफ साहब है या कोई और है जो हमारे कोई दोस्त है, तो ये जरा काइंडली पढ़ ले ताकि मुझे तसल्ली हो कि आप लोग विजिलेंट है। आप जरा काइंडली आ जाए, माइक पे आके थोड़ी ये स्लाइड्स पढ़ ले। एनीवन फ्रॉम द क्लास, अगर मुबशर साहब है या हमारे पीडी साहब आए हैं तो वो आके इसको पढ़ लें. हाँ जी आरिफ साहब, please continue. I'll mute myself.
जी सर. जी सर. Risk identification tools and techniques. Number one is brainstorming, examination of local or overseas experience with similar activities and projects, including analysis of post-project completion reports and audits. Checklists, interviews and focus group discussions, FGDs, scenario analysis and assumption analysis, surveys and questionnaires, and work breakdown structure analysis.
Now, I would just like to comment on the last item. आप इधर ही खड़े रहें, that is work breakdown structure, and you will discuss this during the project management. That when we are doing a project, we break down the project into smaller projects. For example, I was just this morning writing up the main digest part of the revised PC1 of our Faculty of Engineering. So this project has been broken down into 8 components. For example, the civil works, and then within the civil works, we have the main building and external works. And then we have water supply and all these external works. Then we have another component is machine and equipment. Then the third component is furniture and fixtures. Then we have a fifth component. Our fourth component is teaching aids. Then the IT equipment. Then we have the project management team, and so on. The consultancy arrangement, and then we have the contingency. So when we break down the projects into smaller components, we at the same time try to identify the risk associated with each component of the breakdown. So we break down the project into smaller components. You will discuss this in the planning during the project management course, that when we are trying to plan, we basically plan from top to bottom and execute from bottom to top. So we have the planning, and that is top to bottom in the sense that we break down the project into smaller components, and then we execute these components. So we are dividing the projects into smaller components. At the same time, we are trying to see that what can be the challenges. For example, if I divide the civil work into 3 or 4 major components, like the main building, the immediate risk in my mind would come the design risk. That, for example, how the consultant will be engaged and what can be the challenges in the engagement of the consultant. If I talk in the external development like water supply, or the external electrification, or gas, or other utilities, there might be some challenges. For example, the place may be very remote. It may not be connected to the mainline grid, and there might be a long distance to connect it to the national grid, and so on. So while we are identifying the breakdown of the projects, we are trying to see that what can be specific risk of each and every component of the project. So that is normally we call it. So while we are developing the risk breakdown, the work breakdown, we also develop the risk breakdown. So that is parallel to each other, that for each component of the risk, we try to, of the project, we try to see the risk breakdown structure. तो दो चीजें आप ज़हन में रख ले, एक WBS, which is work breakdown structure, the way you divide the project into smaller components, and then the way you identify the project's associated risk for each component. So we have the WBS, work breakdown structure, and at the same time, we have the risk breakdown structure, RBS. ये आगे किसी जगह आ भी जाएंगी. ओके सर, कैरी ऑन. अगले पे जाते हैं. आरिफ, प्लीज कंटिन्यू.
जी सर, brainstorming. Brainstorming is a technique by which a group attempts to generate ideas or find a solution for a specific problem by amassing ideas spontaneously and without judgment. An experienced facilitator should run the brainstorming session, and then be careful not to overuse or misuse brainstorming. Psychology literature shows that individuals produce a greater number of ideas working alone than they do through brainstorming in small face-to-face groups. Group effects often inhibit idea generation.
We discussed this, that brainstorming may not be a very good way to induce the positive discussion. In our culture, you might have seen that many people get personal and they start objecting each other, and many times this is not creating a very good collective wisdom. So normally we prefer to have the questionnaire survey like things, our expert survey, our interviews instead of brainstorming. But certainly it is a very common and fundamental process to bring the experts on board and then start a brainstorming. Ajaji, next.
जी सर, ये brainstorming again. जी sir, brainstorming allows the identification process to draw on the creative capacity of the participants, reducing the danger of overlooking new and emerging issues, as can happen with checklists. Brainstorming is a very useful technique for the initial identification of a wide range of risks, particularly for large or unique projects. It is an interactive, team-based approach depending for its success on the breadth of experience and skills present in the brainstorming group and the skills of the facilitator. It usually involves the key members of the project team together with any specialists who can bring additional necessary expertise to the process. The aim of the brainstorming session is to cover all potential risks without making judgments about their importance in the initial stages.
In fact, when we are going for brainstorming our risk identification, at that time we should not be very particular about the nature of risk, whether it is a high risk or very high risk or medium risk or low risk. I think the more important is to less down the risks which can be there in the risk register, because at this stage we may not be in a position to decide that what can be the most serious risk. So it is more convenient and it's more recommended that when we are going for brainstorming, it should create all possible list of all possible risks we can identify, because at this stage we cannot say that what can be the most important and less important. And so in the brainstorming session, the major objective is to create the list of all probable and possible risk factors, and that is really very important, so that we are not neglecting some important risk factor.
Should I continue, sir? When objectives are stated clearly and are understood by the participants, a brainstorming session drawing on the creativity of the participants can be used to generate a list of risks. In the session, risks that are known unknowns may emerge, and perhaps even some risks that were previously unknown may become known. Using a cross-functional team of employees greatly increases the value of the process, because it sheds light on how risks and objectives are correlated and how they can impact business units differently. With the team sharing experiences coming from different backgrounds and having different perspectives, brainstorming can be successful in identifying risks. It is also powerful when used at the executive level or with the audit committee and or board of directors.
Now, this is really very important. यहाँ जो बात की गई, it's very important, and I usually say a very famous quotation in the risk management: "There's those who talk don't know, and those who know don't talk." This is the same case with the risk management, that many expert people, though they are reluctant to share their knowledge, and those who are sometimes talking may not be knowing the real problems. Now, this is really very challenging for the moderator, that how he can or she can bring out the kind of knowledge which can be more relevant to the, because many times we see that the discussion and the brainstorming becomes personal, biased, and undirected or misdirected, which ultimately creates a lot of confusion. So in the brainstorming, the leading role is done by the moderator because he or she has to control the discussion in a way which is more focused and directed. And I'll share with you some of our focal discussion. We have also recorded the videos and the kind of issues we faced. We have authored almost 3 papers from that work now, Alhamdulillah, and the 4th paper is in the process of publication. Arif Saab, if you are tired, you can give the podium to someone else. I think
sir.
someone else should volunteer to come.
कोई आ जाए जी रीड आउट करने अगला ये यहाँ से
Now, this is now the steps involved in the structured brainstorming. Brainstorming should be structured. It should not be just like a talk show. It should not be like a political discussion we see in the talk shows every evening, which ultimately ends with a scuffle and conflict, and sometimes even they abuse each other, and sometimes you could see that they are even quarreling with each other, fighting with each other. So this is really very important that you have to keep the brainstorming very structured so that the required objectives and outcomes are achieved by the process. Because normally we bring a lot of people from different parts of the country and overseas for this whole process. And if we don't control and structure that, then ultimately the entire efforts can be futile and useless. Ajib, padhe aage, please.
The element is defined by someone familiar with it so that everyone understands what is being considered. The team spends a few moments thinking about the possible risks and noting them on a rough paper. The member most familiar with the elements writes the initial risks list on the whiteboard without comments from the other participants. The other participants that make their contributions to the list, typically the list may be double in size in this step. No judgments should be made up to this point. The team reviews the list, classifying and grouping similar risks where appropriate and adding new ones as ideas are generated. The list can then be simplified if necessary. The aim is usually to generate a list of about 10 risks for each item, although this will vary widely depending on the element being considered.
So one of the most common and easiest way is that you start the discussion and then you write down 5 or 6. The moderator may say that I understand that there can be 5 or 6 major risks in this project. We are doing in KIU, or we are doing in Reserve Campus, or we are doing in the AKDN, or maybe EBK2CNR project. Then every expert may aid his knowledge or her knowledge. He or she made 1 or 2 more points in this. So this ultimately may lead us to have the final list of the risks. Good. Aji, what is sir?
Whatever form of brainstorming is adopted, it is imperative that any checklist or other predetermined views of the risks that might arise be excluded from consideration until after the brainstorming, or at least that attention should not be drawn to them in advance.
Yes, this is very important as you have read it out, that it's imperative that any checklist or other predetermined views of the risk that might arise be excluded from consideration. बाज़ औक़ात हम कोशिश करते हैं कि मेरी जो वाइस चांसलर की जो सोच है या जो मैं जिस तरह समझ रहा हूँ वो बाकी लोगों पे इब्तिदाई से उनके सामने रखूँ और उनको, तो ये ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग की स्पिरिट को जो है वो जो है डिस्करेज करता है, क्योंकि इसमें अगर आप पहले से ही लोगों को अपनी अंडरस्टैंडिंग या जो चीजें, तो शायद बहुत सारे लोग फिर उसमें they may not be able to positively and collectively provide their feedback. तो जाहिर है आपको एक बड़ा डेमोक्रेटिक तरीके से चीजों को आगे लेके जाना होता है. So we have to be careful so that people are. Now, what are the different kind of participants we are expecting in the brainstorming process? This is really very important. मुझे बड़ा दुख होता है कई दफा कि मुझे ये एज एन एक्सपर्ट बुलाते हैं और फिर वहां मुझे अजीब सा लगता है कि वहां जो लोग बुलाए जाते हैं दे आर नॉट रिलेवेंट टू दैट एक्सपर्टीज एंड जस्ट टू हैव द फिलिंग रोल्स and just to give the people representation. I think this is very unfortunate. In many of the brainstormings we have at different levels. तो इसके लिए जो एक गाइडलाइन दी गई है, it's really very important. पढ़े बेटा.
Participants of the brainstorming workshop must include expertise from a cross-section of disciplines and stakeholders that covers all areas of interest in the project. People who might be included in a brainstorming group are the project manager and the project team, project sponsors and site representatives, discipline engineers, experts with specific knowledge in particular areas of concern, where there are many be insufficient expertise in the project team, commercial specialists, health, safety, and environmental specialists, people who experience in similar previous or current projects, users of the project's outcomes, key stakeholders who need to be confident in the project, and the project management process before approvals are granted.
So this just gives us a broader checklist or list of the prospective people who can be useful in the risk identification process. But this is not end. You can aid based on your experience. You can aid even some more people. For example, a particular community or a particular expert which you think is more expert in the GB area. So he can also be part of this brainstorming team and risk identification team. But this generally provides you the broader principle of a risk identification team and their involvement. But certainly there can be many other people in your mind who can be useful in this identification process. Now, I think it can be read by someone else. किसी और को बुलाए बेटा. I want everyone should have the courage to speak, and because MS is a very senior degree, and I would like that everybody should be having some communication skills. Some of you may go to the research or projects. जी पढ़े बेटा.
Checklists are quick to use and they provide useful guides for areas in which the organization has depth of experience, particularly for projects that are standard or routine in nature. Example, standard checklist for inviting biddings. Second, standard design checklist. Third, standard quality checklist. More suitable for recurring and similar projects executed in the mature projects. When a project is not the same as anything in the organization has dealt with before, and then a checklist can provide a constraint on creative thought. For projects that involve new features, a brainstorming approach is recommended initially, with checklists reserved for stimulating brainstorming sessions, reviewing the identification process, and ensuring that no issues have been left out.
Now, there are some strengths of checklists, no doubt. For example, for the kind of projects which are very recurring in nature, where the organization have enough expertise, previously have done this kind of projects, and where the people dealing with the risk identification process are highly expert in the risk areas. So in that case, you can use the checklist method, which is very easy. For example, we are using the checklist method for the building analysis. We are using the checklist for the design risk assessment. We are also using the quality checklist and sites to see that whether the important features of the site requirements have been fulfilled or not. But if you are dealing with a new project which you have not already done, or a complex project which involves a very broad and deep stakeholders, the standard checklist method may not be that useful. And in that particular instant, you may need to have a very specialized kind of brainstorming. So certainly it can help, but sometimes it can restrict the collective wisdom, and it may discourage the people to share their own knowledge for the risk assessment. So as a general principle, the checklist method is more commonly used for the recurring and common type of projects when the organization have enough experience and there are experts available in that particular area. But certainly it cannot be useful for the complex and diverse and challenging projects. Now, this is a kind of uh, risk identification checklist, which has been used by one of the project proponents, that what can be the strategic risk, for example, which are the agency purpose and agenda. For example, if we are bringing a new project at Karakoram International University, how it fits into our strategic vision. Because many times the projects which are not fitting into the strategic vision of organization may fail. So this might be a strategically important, for example, having the faculty of engineering is having a strategic importance in our vision, that to enable technologically the people and youth of the Gilgit-Baltistan. And that's really very important for us. The second is public image. This is really very important. Many projects have been failed, not because the projects were not good, but the perception of public about these projects was not good, and ultimately the people rejected that. And you could see a lot of good projects in Gilgit-Baltistan failed because the initial image and involvement of the public was not very effective, and ultimately it was not accepted by them. The relationship with the stakeholders is really very important. For example, if we are starting a project in an area which is challenging, like Chelas or Tangir, or there in the somewhere in the remote areas, this is really very important, that how strong we are connected to the stakeholders. And I really like the WASEP project and the AKDN approach, that when they are going for a community-based project, they have a very strong stakeholder relationship. Then the media, that how the media will think about it, and what is the role of media in projecting the positive things about the project. Then the political support must be there, the commercial or business, if you are going for starting a new project, which will ultimately develop some products, some new businesses. It's really very important to see that the commercial feasibility is available. Then the staff and employees, their availability is really very important. Unfortunately, in the Gilgit-Baltistan, one of the major reasons for the project delays is non-availability of the expertise available in the technical staff. We don't have the qualified masons, we don't have the qualified plumbers, and ultimately we have a lot of issues. So we have to see that whether this issue is being resolved or not. Then we have the technological issue, another very big challenge in the Gilgit-Baltistan. When we're talking about the IT projects, the internet connectivity, the accessibility, the price, and all these becomes really very challenging for us. So certainly we have to see that the technological aspect is well understood and we don't have any challenges. Business, legal liability. Legal liability is another very big challenge in projects in Gilgit-Baltistan, because there is a legal issues. The legal framework is not very well defined in the Gilgit-Baltistan, though the governments are trying to develop some public-private partnership projects. But again, the legal framework in the Gilgit-Baltistan is not very strong enough to convince the investors. So that can be another challenge in places cultural heritage can be another issue. Because when we develop the new projects, there can be some threat to the cultural heritage, and we have to understand. Now, the opportunity cost, that if we are, for example, selecting the particular project, what are the opportunities we are missing? आपके पास 2 अरब रुपए हैं आपके डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स के लिए, आप एक फैकल्टी ऑफ इंजीनियरिंग प्रोजेक्ट्स बनाना चाहते हैं, तो बहुत सारी अपॉर्चुनिटीज लाइक द कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ न्यू हॉस्टल, द कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ अ न्यू कैंपस may not be availed. So what can be the cost of that opportunity which you have missed? the benefits which you have missed is really very important, and you have then to balance that our decision should bring more opportunities than what we have lost. So internal risk, I will not go into this. Stakeholder relationship risk, तो इसको further इन्होंने explain किया कि जी मुख्तलिफ risk categories जो है वो further explain की जा सकती है, ये आप फिर बाद में देख ले. Implies commitment is really very important, और internal communication risk है, decision making related risk and so on. Now the Delphi technique, which is really very interesting, and अभी थोड़ी देर बाद मैं आपसे एक डेल्फी टेक्निक कराऊंगा क्लास में. आरिफ साहब को हम कोऑर्डिनेटर बना लेंगे, और एक वो थोड़ा पढ़ ले तो उस पे फिर हम एक एक्सरसाइज शुरू कर लेंगे. ओके जी, पढ़ ले बेटा.
जी सर. The Delphi technique is a method by which a consensus of experts can be reached on a subject such as project risk. Project risk experts are identified but participate anonymously. The Delphi technique helps reduce bias and minimizes the influence of any one person on the outcome. A facilitator uses a questionnaire to solicit ideas about the important project risks. The responses are submitted and put into risk categories by the facilitator. These risks are then circulated to the experts for further comment. Consensus on the main project's risk may be reached after few rounds of this processes.
दिस इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग, और इस पे हम एक छोटा प्रोजेक्ट भी अभी छोटा सी एक्टिविटी करेंगे, और इसका मॉडरेटर जो है वो आरिफ साहब को हम बना लेते हैं. आपके जो 3, 4, 5 जो भी ग्रुप बने हैं, जो भी लोग उसमें आए हैं, उनके सामने हमारा एक क्वेश्चन ये है कि व्हाट आर द मेजर प्रोजेक्ट्स इन योर माइंड इन द गिलगित बल्तिस्तान. चले कंस्ट्रक्शन इंडस्ट्री को हम ले लेते हैं, उसमें क्या, और ये करना इस तरह है कि जो भी आपके इंडिविजुअल्स हैं वो अपने एक कागज पे अलग बैठ के, बेशक ग्रुप में न करे, अलग बैठ के वो राइट डाउन करे वो जो भी आपके जहन में आता है कि जी क्या आपके जहन में 10 बड़े रिस्क है जो इस वक्त कंस्ट्रक्शन इंडस्ट्री को गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में दरपेश हो. द क्वेश्चन इज, और द प्रोजेक्ट इज द रिस्क आइडेंटिफिकेशन इन द कंस्ट्रक्शन प्रोजेक्ट्स in Gilgit Baltistan. That is the process. अब उसके अंदर पहले राउंड में हम ये कर लेंगे, क्योंकि अगर सबका, कितने लोग इस वक्त क्लास में आए हुए हैं? How many people are present now?
21 सर.
चले मेरे ख्याल में इस तरह करते हैं कि 21 को तो प्रेजेंट करना मुश्किल हो जाएगा, तो हम 3-3 लोगों के छोटे ग्रुप्स आरिफ साहब आप बनाए या 4-4 के बनाए, ताकि ज्यादा हमारे पास डेल्फी टेक्निक का एक प्रोसेस. तो 4-4 लोगों के 5 ग्रुप हम बना लेते, एक में बेशक 5 हो जाए. ये प्रॉब्लम आप अपने ग्रुप में डिस्कस करके आप वो, बल्कि इसमें हम आरिफ साहब को मॉडरेटर लेते हैं, तो ही विल नॉट बी पार्ट ऑफ एनी ग्रुप, रादर ही विल फैसिलिटेट, ही विल बी द फैसिलिटेटर. हम, द क्वेश्चन इज टू आइडेंटिफाई the top 10 risk factors in the construction industry of Gilgit Baltistan. ये आपके सामने एक क्वेश्चन है. 5 ग्रुप अलग अलग बैठ के इस पे एक कागज में डिस्कस कर ले, और वो सारे जो है अपना ग्रुप का नाम नहीं लिखेंगे, अपना नाम भी नहीं लिखेंगे. वो जो 5 ग्रुप है वो ये फैक्टर्स जो है आरिफ साहब को देंगे. आरिफ साहब विदाउट नेमिंग द ग्रुप आप सबके सामने वो रीड आउट करेंगे, और रीड आउट करने के बाद आपको दोबारा कहा जाएगा कि जी आप हमें दोबारा 10 फैक्टर, क्या आप पिछले में कुछ ऐड करना चाहते हैं, कुछ को ड्रॉप करना चाहते, दिस इज अप टू द ग्रुप. उसके बाद दोबारा आप हमें सबमिट करेंगे, और आरिफ साहब दोबारा 5 ग्रुप के वो पढ़ेंगे. तो 3 आइटरेशंस के बाद हम देखेंगे कि कौन से फैक्टर्स 10 जिस पे हमारी एक कलेक्टिव कंसेंसस जो है वो डेवलप हो रहा है, वो हमारे बड़े 10 फैक्टर्स होंगे. तो ये एक डेल्फी टेक्निक हम आपसे कराना चाहते हैं. आरिफ, डिड यू अंडरस्टैंड इट?
जी जी सर, यस. Just go ahead, sir.
तो मेरे ख्याल में ये कोई 15 मिनट का या आधे घंटे I'll be connecting online. आप इस प्रोसेस को शुरू करें. The question is that a Delphi technique for identification of top 10 risk factor in the construction industry of Gilgit-Baltistan. We divide the class into 5 groups of 4 each. Arif Saab will be the facilitator or moderator. And the first round, they will write down, discuss mutually for 5 minutes, and then they will write down the factors without naming the group. You will then read it out to the class, and then you give them opportunity again to revisit and write it again. So based on this, we see that how can we reach at a consensus about the top 10 risk factors. This is what we call as Delphi technique. Normally इसमें ग्रुप का तो नहीं होता, लेकिन अगर हम 20 लोगों को पढ़ना शुरू करें तो शायद ये बहुत टाइम ले हमारे एक राउंड में. तो इसको थोड़ा हम सिंपल कर रहे हैं कि हम हर ग्रुप को एक पर्सन समझते हुए 5 ग्रुप में हम डिवाइड हो जाते हैं, और फिर 5 मिनट के बाद या 10 मिनट के बाद हम फर्स्ट राउंड शुरू करते हैं, और then we see that how can we conclude this. This can be a very good exercise even for writing a paper. ये जो आपके पास आ जाएंगे, इसको फिर इंशाल्लाह हम कुछ आर्टिकल की सूरत में भी लिख लेंगे. So over to you,
Right,
Arif
sir.
Saab.
We have formed 5 groups, sir.
Okay.
So,
these factors, the construction industry in Delhi, Pakistan is facing 10 major risks. Construction industry. वो रीडेबल करके लिखिएगा.
ये बहुत सही है हमने कहा अच्छा वाईफाई नहीं चल रहा दूसरा वाईफाई लेकिन वैसे वाईफाई है आपका इस एरिया में नहीं है ना इस एरिया में
Do we have some result of first round? Can we just announce the first round? I think the first round should finish now, and we should announce the first round. Facilitator should announce the first round result.
Sir, if you allow me, we proceed. I have got
Okay,
the
please
findings from 4
continue.
groups. 5th one is still working. So should I read out the points that these groups have come up with, sir?
Yes, you read it out and don't mention the group.
Okay. Okay. So one of the groups, I would say, one of 5 groups, we had 5 groups. So one of the groups has come up with the following points, the risks that they think the construction industry in GB is faced with. Allocation of funds, social issues, land acquisition, unavailability of experts and skilled HR, political influence, environmental effects, safety, time constraints, logistic approaches, and quality issues. So one of the groups, sir, this is what the group says.
Okay, please second.
Another group says weather constraints, unavailability of technical HR, lack of skilled laborers, legal constraints, geographic challenges, political issues, transportation cost, stakeholders relationship gap.
Yes, when the facilitator is reading out the risk factors identified by the individual or group, the group member or individual may note the new risks which were not previously identified by them. And they may take the notes to see that if there is some new risk which was not previously identified by them, so that if they think it is important, then what they have already identified, they can revisit their list of the risk factors.
Right, sir. So these new things, group members should write it down or the facilitator?
Facilitator has nothing to do with the process. This is just facilitator.
Okay.
I mean, the groups may,
Yes.
based on their perception, should also write down the new factors which have been identified by the other group, because we don't
Other
know who
groups.
has written it. We don't know who has. So based on the perception of others, I may come up with a new risk factor which was previously neglected by me. So is a process we need to write it down by the group, all the groups rather, so that if they are revisiting it in the next cycle or the next iteration, they may come up with a new list of the factors.
Yeah. So yeah, they've got it, sir. They got your point. So the political issues, transportation cost, stakeholder relationship, lack of commitment and gaps, technological issues, and cultural constraints. So one of the groups is these findings. I mean, this is how they have come up with, sir. And third group we have, one of the groups rather, delay risks due to landslides and road blockage. Construction industry may face lockdown due to rising COVID-19 cases, natural hazards, disasters rather, inflation in material price of materials may cause claims from contractor side. Closure of work during winter cause delays. Skilled persons, technical staff, unavailability, material availability or unavailability, material availability rather, this is what written in here. Availability of professional capacity firms of required category and experience, availability of funds from government, legal issues, law and orders situation. Findings from another group, natural human induced hazards, sectarian political bureaucratic influence, land acquisition issues, budget constraints, unavailability of modern equipment, unpredictable weather, harsh climatic conditions, safety and health, unrealistic survey data, unavailability of material testing labs, lack of coordination among stakeholders. And the last group, defects in project design, land acquisition, natural disasters, extreme weather conditions, delay in project approval, procedural delays, unavailability of funds, delays in project commencement, unavailability of skilled labor, skilled and unskilled labor. I think they want to say unskilled, lack of skilled labor rather. Yes. Material and lack of machinery, material and lack of machinery, health and safety of laborers, no proper monitoring and evaluation mechanism. So, sir, with this, it comes to an end. Sir, we can't hear you. Sorry.
The fifth has also submitted their findings.
Sorry, sir.
जो fifth group है जो
Yes.
काम कर रहे थे उन्होंने कर लिया है. The fifth
Yes,
one.
sir. The last. Yes, yes. The
Okay, so
last
thank you.
points
Let
belong
us
to them.
just as a process, let us we again give them back. Do they still stand with those 10 or do they have some new ideas to come? तो ये
Okay.
लोग अब दोबारा जो है इसको रिविजिट करें और क्या वो उन 10 फैक्टर्स को अभी भी उतना ही इंपॉर्टेंट समझ रहे हैं जो पहले थे या उनके जहन में दो बातें नई भी आ गई बेस्ड ऑन दिस कलेक्टिव ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग. तो ये बेशक दोबारा इसको लिख ले, क्या उसमें कोई नया ऐड का 5-10 मिनट इस पे हम लगा लेते हैं. And then we see what are the very common factors in all the 5 groups based on the. तो दोबारा इनको मेरे ख्याल में ये revisit करें. Maybe they are coming up with 2 or 3 new factors in their mind with this process. अगर नहीं है तो उसको दोबारा हमें दे दें लिख के. So we give them 10 minutes more to revisit the list of 10 risk factors in the construction industry of Gilgit-Baltistan, and then in the third, maybe just to, this may continue for maybe 3 or 4 cycles. There is no end to this in the sense that there is no upper limit, but normally in the third or fourth cycle, we conclude about the 10 factors based on the frequency. We develop the frequency table because normally we have a big number of people, 15 to 20, and then based on the frequency table, we may say that these are the 10 most important project risks. तो इनको आप दे दें मेरे ख्याल में 10 मिनट के एक और आइटरेशन करके इसको फिर कंक्लूड कर देते हैं.
जी सर, जी सर.
Access and roads and all that. Personal maintenance rights here. There are a number of notes on it.
ले सर हम आरिफ साहब मेरे ख्याल में इनसे आप ले लें, टाइम हो गया है, आप ले लें ताकि हम डिस्कस कर लें और इसको कंक्लूड भी कर लें।
बस एक ही ग्रुप का रहता है सर, वो भी आ रहा है। So should I read out, sir, the kind of changes the groups have made?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the groups who initially came up with 10 constraints have made 2 changes in their second review process.
ये पढ़ ले, दोबारा पढ़ ले
सारे दोबारा पढ़ लूं सर?
हाँ जी, ताकि इसका हम एक
प्रीवियस एंड न्यू दोनों पढ़ लूं या
नहीं
अभी वाला पढ़?
प्रीवियस का नहीं, अभी जो न्यू लिस्ट ऑफ 10 फैक्टर्स है वो 1 by 1 पढ़ ले। मैं इसका एक फ्रीक्वेंसी टेबल भी बना रहा हूँ, ठीक है
जी सर। अच्छा, एलोकेशन ऑफ फंड्स एंड स्लो ऑफिशियल प्रोसीजर्स, social and cultural issues, land acquisition, unavailability of experts, skilled HR, political influence, law and order, environmental factors, natural disasters, safety and health, unavailability of modern machinery, no proper monitoring and evaluation, logistic approaches. So yes, are one of the groups who have made 2 changes.
ठीक है पढ़े दूसरे का
Another group, sir, second group, weather constraints. Achha, now, sir, they have chalked down 12 risks instead of 10. So just they have added 2 to the previous 10.
ठीक है आप पढ़ ले सबको पढ़ ले
Weather constraints, unavailability and technical HR and skilled labor, legal constraints, geographical challenges, political issues, transportation cost of materials, stakeholders relationship, communication gap between stakeholders, technological issues, lack of modern equipment, machinery, cultural heritage, law and order situation, absence of building by laws, land acquisition issues. Acha, one of the groups have added 9 more points. So I start from 1. Natural human induced hazards. Gigi, Vishisa wants me to read everything, again. Natural human induced hazards, sectarian political bureaucratic influence, land acquisition issues, budget constraints, unavailability of modern equipment, unpredictable weather, land, harsh climatic conditions, safety and health, unrealistic survey data, unavailability of material testing labs, lack of coordination among stakeholders, approvals and authorities, lack of ownership, corruption, non-hiring of engineers by the contractors, improper allocation of resources, HR and material resource, unavailability, lack, shortage of electricity, lack of communication infrastructure, lack of chain of command, lack of transparency and accountability. Delay risks due to another group. Delay risks due to landslide and road blockage. Construction industry may face lockdown due to rising COVID-19 cases, natural disasters. Inflation in market price of materials may cause, inflation in market price of materials may cause claims from contractor side. Closure of work during winter causes delays. Skilled persons, technical staff, unavailability, material unavailability, availability of professional contracting firms of required category and experience, availability of funds from government, legal issues, law and order situation. 2 points they have added, political influence, proper monitoring and evaluation mechanism. And the last group, sir. Defects in project design, land acquisition, natural disasters and pandemics, extreme weather conditions, delay in project commencement, unavailability of funds, price fluctuation in materials, maybe unavailability of skilled, unskilled laborers and lack of material, modern equipment and machinery, health and safety of project team, absence of material testing labs and lack of quality assurance mechanism, awarding construction of contract of construction to contractors without fulfilling predefined due processes, law and order situations. Finish, sir.
So thank you very much. If you just look at the list of all these factors which have been revisited now by the group or individuals, we may develop a frequency table and may see that, for example, I see some of the factors are very common, like the unavailability of skilled labor, the inclement weather, and the procedural difficulties and things like that. So based on the frequency table, we would then identify that what are the top 10 out of these all factors which have been identified by the groups or by the individuals, and based on that, they define that these are the top 10 factors. Now, आप बैठे sir, thank you.
जी सर.
आरिफ साहब आप तशरीफ रखें जी. Now, if you look at the next technique is interviewing, and normally interviewing is used in combination with the questionnaire survey or the brainstorming. For instance, if we finally resolve that these are the 10 major factors or 20 major factors of risk in the project, then it may be followed by the expert interviews and structured interviews, and where the experienced people, which are normally the project managers in their particular field, are then interviewed by the risk management team to identify or deeply dig out the factors further. Now, the selection of appropriate individual is very important and instrumental for the success of interviewing. Normally, we don't go for the random sampling in the interviewing, because in this kind of studies, we need to know the background of the interviewee, and we need to know his expertise. So we will go for a convenience kind of sampling in which we select the people first from the group of respondents, and then based on their, for example, normally we say that a person who is in construction industry for 20 years or 15 to 20 years, we consider him to be a very appropriate person to respond. Then we may think also another factor, we may consider that he or she must have worked in the Gilgit-Baltistan in some projects, so that he can have a good understanding of the project dynamics. So based on this various filters, we then go for the convenience kind of sampling, and we may select 5 or 10 people for this particular study. So certainly it cannot be random sampling, because a person we randomly select from the group of respondents may not be having relevance to the projects. The interviewees identify risk on the projects based on their experience, the project information, and any other source that they find useful. And that's why the relevance and the experience of the interviewee is really very important. You all may know about the SWOT analysis. That SWOT analysis, which is strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats. The two factors we see within the organization, and the two factors, opportunity and threats, are normally from the outside. So in SWOT analysis, for any new project, we try to see that what can be the strengths and weaknesses of the organization inside. For example, if we are talking about a new project of the, अभी हम एक project conceive कर रहे हैं, it's a very interesting project, and luckily, thanks to HEC and thanks to Allah, that Karakoram University has been selected as one of the partner university, and we are trying to develop international standard sports complex in Karakoram University. So this is a project which is a very diverse project, which will involve not only sports, but also the youth development, national and international activities like things. Now, this requires a lot of strengths within the organization. If, for example, we don't have the people who can develop the concepts in a way which is attractive to HEC, who are not having the strength to develop the project management, who are not having the strength. So the organization strengths inside are really very important in terms of technology, in terms of land availability, in terms of the skills of the project team, and their familiarity with the projects we are conceiving. It's really very important. And the weaknesses, again, inside the, for example, we cannot be perfect or strong in every area. For example, if they want to use the sports for health and hygiene, we may need some experts in that area also. And there might be some inherent weaknesses in the organization in terms of their familiarity with the project, knowledge, and all these. And once we are trying to enhance our strengths, and mitigate or reduce our weaknesses for the projects. For example, the project management team may not be conversant with the computerized project management tools. This is a weakness because if we are really dealing with a very complex project, we may need to have a very strong computer software use of the project management softwares. Now, to bridge this gap or weakness, we may find or we may involve some training or some intensive training on project management or computerized project management for the project team. Now, the opportunities are normally outside the boundary of organization. For example, when I talk about the Gilgit-Baltistan or region, what are the opportunities available for this project? For example, can we bring the players from international for the international games? How can we involve the universities from China and Central Asia to be part in this? So these are opportunities. Opportunities are normally outside the organization, and if we do it, for example, the biggest opportunity for this project is that in the entire Gilgit-Baltistan, we don't have any sports complex. And that is a very big opportunity which can attract this project, and which can convince the HEC and the Pakistan Sports Board and the sports department of GB and also the Federal Sports Directorate or the Sports Board to be involved. That is a great opportunity. Now, the threats can be that if, for example, I don't bring this project, what can be the threats? The threats can be our competitive threats, that we cannot be, if this project is done somewhere else, then definitely I'll lose this opportunity. If I don't have, so the threats are normally without the project, that if I don't do the project, what can be threats in the environment, external environment, which I can have, and that can, for example, affect my profitability, my existence, my acceptability in the society, so these all are the threats which I should think about when I'm bringing a project. The examination of the project from each of the SWOT perspective to increase the breadth and risk. A SWOT analysis classification of the situation analysis that focuses on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. By examining each of the SWOT analysis perspective in turn, the project team ensured that the breadth of the risk considered is maximized. SWOT analysis is a useful technique in project management risk, where it is desirable to reduce the probability and impact of threat and increase the probability of impact and opportunity. So this is what the risk management normally talks about, that you have to reduce the threats, you have to enhance the opportunities. SWOT analysis is a useful technique in project management risk, where it is desirable to reduce the now, this is kind of just a SWOT matrix, and you see that the strengths are normally are resources and capabilities that can be used as a basis for developing a competitive advantage. And normally these strengths are within the organization most of the time. And the weakness is the absence of certain strengths which may be viewed as a weakness. In some cases, a weakness may be the flip side of the strength. The other side of the strength. For example, if you are very good in the project management, the flip side can be that you may not be very good in the computerized project management. So that would then certainly bring a weakness. So weakness is something which we need to identify. For example, we are talking about the complex projects or the bigger projects of 4 or 5 billion. The immediate weakness we see is the kind of strengths with us, which will be required for this diverse and complicated projects to execute. So we would need a very diverse and experienced project manager to execute this very complex project. We do have the civil engineers, we have the IT infrastructure people, but together the project may be very complex, and we may not be having a very experienced project manager to deal with the very diverse and complicated projects. Now, the opportunities, the external environment analysis that may reveal new opportunities for the profit and growth. For example, how this new sport complex in Karakoram University can attract the international players. How can we have the GB League? How can we have the Pakistan Cricket League in this new facility? And how can we then use that for the development of university? And the threats are the changes in the external environment, which may be to the firms. For example, if we don't do it, how it can impact the students and our competitive positioning in the international or national ranking. Another technique is the assumption analysis, which we normally say what if analysis, that if for example, the construction input material prices increases, what can be the different scenarios and assumptions. So we assume, for example, that in the first year, the project input prices may be increased by 5 or 10%. And based on that, we can then say that what can be the increase in price of the project. So the assumptions, we develop different, and we normally also call it sensitivity analysis, that if the assumption is not proved correct, if one of the assumptions or all of the assumptions are not proved correct, then what can happen? So this is normally called sensitivity analysis also, that we develop different assumptions. For example, if we are bringing a new product in the market, we may have, the assumption might be that the project will be, or the product will be accepted very widely by the people, and it will create a very good demand. So this is, this will lead to a very good profitability. But the second assumption can be that the demand may be normal like other projects or other products, and we can think of some normal returns. And the third assumption can be that the project cannot hit, or the product may not be able to hit the market, and we have a very low, below average demand. So for each assumption, then we develop the sale, and we develop the scenario, and then we think about the expected probability of that particular scenario, and based on that, we then develop the. So underpinning every project is a set of hypotheses, scenarios, and assumptions made initially. Assumptions are any piece of project information that is believed to be true at a point in time, but which cannot be validated. So we have, for example, when we are developing the engineering faculty, we believe that within next 4 or 5 years, we will be producing something like 200 engineers. Now, this is something which cannot be validated in the beginning. We do have some data that so many engineers are produced across the country from the Gilgit-Baltistan, but it cannot be validated at this point. As the project progresses, initial assumptions should be validated and are incorporated to the plans. So when the project moves forward, you can. अभी हमने एडमिशन की, हमें पता चला कि माइनिंग में हमारे पास जो एडमिशंस है वो कुछ ज्यादा नहीं हो रहे. So we are now thinking to bring another department like civil engineering and to attract. So you learn from your own assumptions and misassumptions. If an assumption cannot be validated, it may become a risk. As the project progresses, you should reassess the validity of these assumptions. Assumption analysis is a technique that explores the validity of assumptions by identifying risk to the project from inaccuracy, inconsistency, and incompleteness of assumptions. And this is normally called sensitivity analysis, that we are trying to see that whether the assumptions are, for example, we started a new program and we thought that in the first year we will have 50 students. Now this is an assumption. And when we started the admission, we came to know that the department is not attracting more than 25 or 30 students. So how can we revisit our assumptions, and how can we redefine our risks, and how can we address these risks? This is maybe we now think about bringing a new diploma in that particular field, or maybe we starting a short certificate courses so that we can reduce the risk of financial burden. The diagramming techniques, we develop the different, and this is more commonly used in computer simulation models, that we develop the different kind of models, computer models, and based on that models, we develop different scenarios and the flow charts and different diagrams, pie charts, bar graphs, and all these are used to see the different risks based on the historical data and both based on the projected risk. So cause and effect diagram is most commonly used, and I'll share with you one of my paper on the risk associated with the flood risk associated with the mud houses. So we have developed a cause and effect diagram. इसको हम normally इसको हम Ishikawa diagram भी कहते हैं और इसको हम Fishbone diagram भी कहते हैं. There are various names for this diagram. The most common is cause and effect. That, for example, if I'm traveling, for example, to Gilgit by road, if the weather is wrong, the weather is not favorable, this is a cause. And what can be the effect? For example, the effect can be a delay in travel time. If, for example, the tires are not very good, then what can be the effect of this poor tire? It can lead to some accident. So this is another effect of that. The accident can further create some impacts. For example, the damage to vehicle, maybe to damage to driver, damage to the occupants. Now, so based on that, we can understand that what can be the effects of different causes. And we normally call it Fishbone Diagram or Ishikawa Diagram, because a Japanese risk management or project management guru, he developed this method. जिस तरह एक स्टार्ट से एंड तक एक मेन आपकी रीढ़ की हड्डी है और फिश का उसी के साथ उसकी स्पाइंस है और फिर स्पाइन से फर्दर स्पाइंस निकलती है, इसी तरह हर कास के इफेक्ट्स जो है वो हम एक ट्री की सूरत में, इसको बाज़ औक़ात हम रिस्क ट्री भी कहते हैं. रिस्क ट्री, काज एंड इफेक्ट डायग्राम, or Ishikawa diagram or Fishbone diagram. So these are interchangeably used. System or process flow charts. हम अभी कुछ process flow charts आगे शायद हों कि मिसाल के तौर पे अगर आप एक फ्लो चार्ट बनाते हैं कि फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल ये 3 चीज हुई है तो यस, अगर ये नहीं है तो नो, गो टू स्टेप 1 अगेन. इसके आगे फिर डिजाइन डिपार्टमेंट में जाए, वो ये चीजें चेक करे, अगर वो क्लियर है तो यस आगे जाए, नो तो गो बैक टू step 2. So in the cash flow diagram, we try to develop a diagram for the process flow or process flow chart, in which we are influence diagram is a graphical representation of problems showing causal influences, time ordering of events or other relationship. तो इसमें आप influence or tree diagram or cause and effect diagram are more or less the same, but we are trying to see that what can be the causes of different, what can be causes for different risk and what can be the effects of different risk. This is just telling you a small fishbone diagram or cause and effect diagram. For example, the major defect can come from machine failure. It can be the failure of method we have adopted for the any activity. Like, for example, if we are thinking about the concreting failure or concreting process failure, it can come from the failure of machine, that all of a sudden the mixer has stopped working or the left has not been able to work. The method, for example, the white, the kind of so the kind of method we have developed, for example, the selection of material, the method of mixing, the mix design, all these methods may be defective sometimes. The material may be another problem. The selection of appropriate material might not have been done, which have led to the mixing of the material. Then energy, for example, the availability of electricity or the fuel can be the personnel. The people who are doing the concreting job may not be having the expertise. The environment, जिसके अंदर आपका सबसे बड़ा वेदर का एक इशू आ गया कि जी मौसम अचानक खराब हो गया, बारिश शुरू हो गई, जिसकी वजह से कंक्रीटिंग जो है हमारी वक्त पे नहीं हो सकी. सो बेस्ड ऑन दिस वी ट्राई टू, अब मशीन में अगर हम जाएं तो इसको अगर फर्दर मैं ओपन करना चाहूं तो मशीन के बहुत सारे काजेज हो सकते हैं, इफेक्ट्स होते हैं कि मशीन में या तो ये कि उसका बेल्ट टूट गया, वो एक छोटी सी वो है, रिस्क है, लेकिन अगर मशीन का इंजन सीज हो गया. So all these effects and cause the fishbone diagram illustrate the various sources of. This is called Ishikawa diagram or cause and effect diagram. When done in groups, start from the right. The 4M category are typically material, machine, manpower, and methods. These are the 4 M's we normally use to assess the risk in the quality assurance, that The main problem may come from the material, or the inappropriate material, or the material may have be poor quality, or the machine may not be able to deal with the kind of volume of work, and there might be manpower issues, and there might methods may not be appropriate. The practical maximum depth of the tree is usually about 4 to 5 levels. कि आप जिस तरह पिछले स्लाइड में हमने देखा तो सेकंड लेवल पे हम गए थे, तो आप इसको फर्दर भी ओपन कर सकते हैं कि मशीनरी डिफेक्ट्स में क्या क्या इशू हो सकते हैं, और तो 4 to 5 लेवल से ज्यादा फिर हम डिटेल में जाएंगे तो हमारे लिए उसको समझना मुश्किल होगा. When the fishbone is ठीक है, should I continue?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So when the fishbone is complete, one has to rather complete picture of all the possibilities about what could be the root cause of the designated problems. ये एक typical risk register है जिसमें हम ultimately एक फॉर्म की सूरत में वो तमाम रिस्क जो है डॉक्यूमेंट कर लेते हैं कि प्रोजेक्ट क्या है, एलिमेंट्स उसका कौन सा एलिमेंट हम स्टडी कर रहे हैं, मशीनरी को देख रहे हैं, मटेरियल उसमें क्या क्या रिस्क है, और मैनेजर उस रिस्क को कौन मैनेज करेगा. फिर उसकी थोड़ी डिस्क्रिप्शन आ जाएगी कि assumption क्या है, और इंफॉर्मेशन रिस्क के हवाले से हमें कहाँ मिलेगी, और इसके लिए क्या क्या हमारे पास सोर्सेज है जिसके जरिए हमने तो ये एक रिस्क रजिस्टर का टेम्पलेट है कि हम जब रिस्क को फाइनली आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं तो हर रिस्क को एक प्रॉपर फॉर्म में डॉक्यूमेंट करते हैं, एंड दिस बिकम्स द रिसोर्सेज फॉर द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, even for the future project management. Historical records, for example, what can be the sources of this information for various risk identification? It can be historical data, similar related project experience, either specific or project being assessed, similar kind of contractors and suppliers, industry best practices, user experience, relevant benchmarks and standards, relevant published literature, research reports, include theory and failure modes of equipment reliability, product brochures, technical manuals, audit reports, test marketing and marketing research, where there's a benefit in seeking a create. So all these are basically the sources through which we can identify the risks. Similarly, experiment of prototypes, कि आपने पहला जो मॉडल से प्रोटोटाइप बनाया, पहली दफा आपने टेस्ट किया, तो उससे बहुत सारी चीजें आपको पता चल गई कि अगर आप एक नया मोटर बना रहे हैं, नया इंजन बना रहे हैं, तो उसमें क्या क्या मसाइल आपको आ सकते हैं. उस प्रोटोटाइप इज बेसिकली द फर्स्ट रियल ऑफ द मॉडल. ये जरा आप काइंडली ज़हन में रख ले कि प्रोटोटाइप इज द फर्स्ट रियल ऑफ द मॉडल. आपने एक मॉडल बनाया था, उसको आपने एक्सपेरिमेंटली टेस्ट किया, उसको जब ओरिजिनली आपने पहला बनाया तो दैट इज कॉल्ड प्रोटोटाइप. उसको आप टेस्ट करते हैं और उसके अंदर जो इश्यूज आते हैं उनको एड्रेस करते हुए फिर हम कमर्शियल प्रोडक्शन की तरफ जाते हैं. सो प्रोटोटाइप इज बेसिकली द फर्स्ट रियल ऑफ द मॉडल. इकोनॉमिक और अदर मॉडल्स, इकोनोमेट्रिक्स में हम बहुत सारे मॉडल पढ़ते हैं जिसमें हम खासकर कास्ट इम्पैक्ट एनालिसिस में हम या रिस्क में हम मुख्तलिफ मॉडल्स को पढ़ते हैं. उसमें इंडेक्सेशन मॉडल्स हैं, रैंकिंग मॉडल्स हैं, इस बहुत सारे मॉडल्स हैं जो हम जिसके बुनियाद पे हम रिस्क को रैंक करते हैं. Expert commercial and technical judgment, the people who are technical experts and the people who are business experts can also identify some very important risks. So when we compare the brainstorming, which is not a structured meeting, we try to see that brainstorming is idea generation, issue generation, divergent thinking, and open format. With the structured meeting or interviews fixed agenda, there's a chairperson, there are minutes, and there are action points. So this is the difference between the organized structured meetings or interviews, and the brainstorming may be open-ended, and it sometimes may not be able to create some very good consensus. This is just an example that how the risks have been identified under different categories by the, जो अभी आपने एक Delphi technique किया, उसी का एक मॉडल आपके सामने मैं रख रहा हूँ कि जिसमें एक हाईवे प्रोजेक्ट के अंदर जो है रिस्क को आइडेंटिफाई किया गया और उसमें देखा ये गया है कि व्हाट आर दी डिफरेंट, इसके अंदर अगर आप देखें कि एक्सटर्नल रिस्क है, फॉर एग्जांपल व्हिच आर नॉर्मली अनप्रेडिक्टेबल, जिसको हम अननोन उन्होंने कहा। आपने देखा कि उन्होंने एक लफ्ज यूज किया और लास्ट टाइम मैंने भी कहा था कि देयर आर रिस्क व्हिच आर नोन टू अस इन द सेंस दैट वी आर फेमिलियर विद दिस काइंड ऑफ रिस्क, बट देयर आर नंबर ऑफ रिस्क व्हिच आर not even known to us in the beginning, and that is called known unknown. So the external factors may include the regulatory challenges, the natural hazards or disasters, the postulated events which can happen anytime, which you don't know. External predictable things like market risks, operational risk, environmental risks, social risk, inflation, and all these are something which we can predict well in time. Then the internal non-technical risk may be the management issue, the schedule problems, the cost controls, the cash flow problems. The technical issues may include like the technology changes, performance issues, technology-related specific risks, design issues. Then we may think about the legal, like licensing for the project, the contractual obligations, the contract management. Then we have the third-party suits, like if there is any problem at the site, like any accident or encroaching upon the property of others, it can have a legal impact on our project. And the force majeure, force majeure is basically the conditions which are beyond the human control. Force majeure under this condition under the forces of nature. And normally, like the conditions like high floods, like earthquakes, disasters, all these are the conditions which are not in the control of both the sponsor and the project team. So these are sometimes called force majeure. In the contract, there is a provision for the force majeure. In the FedEx contract, we have a force majeure condition. And when the circumstances are beyond the control of employer and the contractor, then there is some solution available in the contract. So the supply chain risk, if you look at this diagram, the supply chain, for example, the goods may be delivered late, overstocking, you have overstocked the material which is not required in the market, incorrect goods, for example, you are demanding a particular model or standard, but it has been delivered with different standards. Then you faulty goods or defective goods, the supply shocks that you have a demand. खासकर अभी जो हमारा एक problem आ रहा है, that is a supply shock we see in the Gilgit-Baltistan. We see the fuel is becoming really a big issue at the moment because there is a supply shock now. The supplier increases their prices. This is another problem in the supply chain management. And then the supplier goes out of business. तो इस तरह के बहुत सारे issues जो है हमारे पास आ जाते हैं. Finally, I think we will finish in a few minutes. That risk analysis of infrastructure project, case study of build, operate and transfer. ये मुख्तलिफ methods में जो हम project करते हैं, there are boot and boat and all these. The most common is boat, that we build it, we operate it for certain years, and then we transfer it to the government. This is very common in world now, that because we cannot invest huge money in the infrastructure projects, and that's why we try to see that if we can bring the partners from the private sector who can own or operate this project, and maybe the normal time for this kind of project is 40 to 50 years. That for 40 and 50 years, the investor may continue to operate the project, get the profit, and then it transferred to the client. Maybe some part of the revenue, 10% or 15%, may be given to the owner or to the person. So this is a very that how the construction projects which were constructed in India have been subject to different risks. and they have been constructed. So please go to this link. I'll share this in the group, all the three presentation today, and please go to. I think this was enough for today. आज इतना काफी है, कुछ कल हमने किया था, तो मेरे ख्याल में this finishes our today's lecture on the risk identification process, and the main objective of this process is to finally identify the major risks or the risks which can be anticipated during the project. ठीक है सर, मेरे ख्याल में it is fine for today.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and sorry for any inconvenience if there was. Okay, ji. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, sir.